ICS in a nutshell, putting ICS into practice for Medical Reserve Corps volunteers. And our presenter this evening, I do have to read, I apologize, is James Slater. He's a trainer with the Office of Emergency Preparedness in the Virginia Department of Health. James's responsibilities lie within the emergency preparedness realm and how it relates to public health preparedness. His current scope of work focuses on emergency operations and coordination, including the application of the incident command structure, HCEP exercises, and statewide communication systems. In addition, he provides support to medical countermeasure and dispensing operation, PODS and ChemPack, along with medical material management and distribution. Mr. Slater draws on experience staffing the ESF 8 desk at the Virginia Emergency Operations Center when activated during statewide events, including medical, weather, and emerging threats. So thank you, James, so much for being here, and take it away.
Well, thank you for having me tonight, and thanks to everyone for joining. Again, my name is James Slater, and what we're going to look at is Incident Command Systems, ICS, in a nutshell. So some of the objectives that we have for tonight's session is identifying three purposes of ICS, what they are. We also want to be able to explain the benefits of using ICS, as well as explaining the purpose of the National Incident Management System, which some refer to as NIMS. We also want to be able to describe the basic features of ICS, explain the benefits of using ICS, and explain the difference between NIMS and ICS. And we also want to recognize that NIMS and ICS discussion can be filled with a lot of TLAs. And we all know what those TLAs are. That's three-letter acronyms. And three-letter acronyms are the bane of my existence, because FEMA says we need to talk in plain English and use common terminologies, but they're the worst culprit of using three-letter acronyms above anyone else I know. So it can be a challenge in understanding some of the different terminologies that are thrown around. So I'm going to play a short video here, so just bear with me 1 second while I queue up the next video.
This tornado was a monster, and it was vicious, and it did not discriminate in its destruction across our city. And growing up here, you couldn't see from one side of town to the other. And to see a 6-mile path, a mile wide of your city gone, to have hundreds of people who are walking in the middle of the street, many of them bleeding, making their way to the hospital, the enormity of this begins to hit you. I knew clearly that this is something you can't walk alone. Not one person, not one government can handle this. 5:30, when I pulled the IC team together for my first briefing, I told them how we respond to this will dictate how we recover as a community. And as long as we were coordinated and we were calm and we were compassionate, we would make it through this terrible crisis here in Tuscaloosa. And the IC structure gives that, because everyone's in one room. The police chief, the fire chief, the TDOT director, environmental services director. Their chain of commands are working up into that room, and then it's coming back down. And ultimately, as mayor, I'm in there as well, making sure that the needs of the entire city are being met. Within the first 5 minutes after the tornado had left the city of Tuscaloosa, we realized that our Curry facility was destroyed, which housed our EMA, Facilities Maintenance, and Environmental Services Department. Over 100 of our vehicles, garbage trucks, trash fleet destroyed. Our main communication tower was destroyed. Our police precinct was destroyed. A fire station was destroyed. Our sewer treatment plant was damaged and almost rendered inoperable. And if we wouldn't have gone through this training, it would have been a disjointed effort. And what I mean by that is this. If we wouldn't have gone through Emmitsburg, we'd have had PD doing their own thing, fire and rescue doing their own thing, environmental services doing their own thing. The IC immediately begins resource allocation. For example, we had no environmental services department. It was gone. We had more than 100 employees who literally had nothing to do. We had lost water pressure in East Tuscaloosa. All of this is coming through the incident command. So immediately incident command says, those 100 employees who don't have anything to do today, they're going to go out and walk water lines with grid maps, and at every leak, we're going to stop and then call in a crew to fix that leak. 8 times a year, we host Alabama football, which basically takes the population of our city from 100,000 to 250,000. And since 9/11, we knew that we needed to improve our homeland security methods. We also knew that if there was an event during an Alabama game day, it would tax our resources. So we thought this training would be a good way to go from a desktop exercise to really get into the nuts and bolts of handling a disaster. And knowing that we're also in Tornado Alley for the South, we thought that this would also sharpen our skills in those responses. We have become the model of how you respond to a disaster. And it all started with the structure. If you don't have command and control, then you cannot respond in a disaster. You can't fly by the seat of your pants. Clearly, in the last few weeks, we've demonstrated that training paid huge dividends.
All right, so we see in that video that a city was basically decimated, and he was really singing the praises on how having this type of training can bring everyone together. So, I mean, ultimately what we want to know is, what is an incident? So an incident by definition is an occurrence or event, natural or man-made, that requires a response to protect life or property. So a little bit of history is that Virginia adopted the National Incident Management System in November of 2005. And the state coordinator of the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, known as VDEM, is responsible for NIMS implementation across the state. So NIMS, what is it? Well, it's a consistent nationwide approach for federal, state, tribal, and local governments to work effectively and efficiently together to prepare for, prevent, respond to, and recover from domestic incidents, regardless of cause, size, location, or complexity. So the question is, where does ICS fit in? Well, the way I look at it is that NIMS is the house. It's the big building that everything else kind of goes into, and NIMS is the overall structure, and then an ICS is just a piece of that building, maybe just a brick that fits in there to make it stable. So with ICS as a brick of that foundation, we see here that it kind of sits right there in the bottom, but it falls under the command and coordination. So that's really like, who's in charge? How do we coordinate among all these multiple agencies that were set forth? Then we look at, to the left, we have resource management. How do we manage the resources that we have? And then also, how do we communicate in the information management? And that's whether it's within the ICS structure, but also communications going outside of the ICS structure too with the general public. So what is the incident management system? Well, it's a standardized on-scene all hazards incident management. And the reason that it's all hazards, it does this type of organization, it doesn't matter whether it's a tornado. It doesn't matter whether it's a snowstorm. It doesn't matter if it's a situation where we're falling under COVID like we're doing right now. It also allows users to adopt an integrated organizational structure. Well, what does that mean? Well, an integrated organizational structure means that we can plug and play with other groups without changing a whole lot of what we do. It gives us a lot of considerable flexibility, and it's a proven management system based on successful business practices of how you run an organization. So what does ICS decide to do? Well, it meets the needs of incidents of any kind or size. So that could be a very small incident, or it could be a very large incident. And I kind of liken it to, let's say that I'm at home and I'm cooking on the stove and I have a grease fire. Well, what do? Like, I don't necessarily know what to do, but let's say that I just smother it and I put it out. Well, that's a small incident. I figured out what the issue was. I figured out what we needed to do, and I solved the problem. Small incident. Let's say that that same grease fire, I decided to throw water on it. Well, water is not the best thing to do because that's going to make it flash up. The grease is going to, and the fire is going to go up on the walls. It's going to go on the cabinets, and it's going to get out of control. Well, that makes it a larger incident. So the fire department might be called, and they're going to step in and they're going to utilize their resources. But let's say that they don't get there fast enough, and that fire spreads to the house next door, and the house next door, and the house next door. Incidents can, and the scope of it can actually go very quickly. It can spin out of control, but as long as we have a structure in place, we're able to attack it efficiently. It's also going to allow personnel from a variety of different agencies to meld rapidly to form a common management structure. So when you think about an incident like that, who's going to show up to a fire? Well, it's going to be the fire department. We're going to have emergency medical services show up in case that there was some type of burns. We're going to have the police department shutting off roads. Then you might have the city come because a building inspector is going to say, is the house inhabitable? There's lots of different people that are going to come in together, but they all understand that structure. It's also designed to provide logistical and administrative support. Well, who pays for it? How do I get resources? You know, when we were dealing with multiple agencies, who handles it? Who signs the dotted line? That's the logistical and administrative support. If there's overtime involved, who's going to sign off on it? It's also cost effective by avoiding duplication of efforts. So multiple agencies aren't ordering multiple of the same item because maybe we have purchasing guidelines that allows us to buy it in bulk and then divvy that up between the different agencies. They may also have state contracts that are available that we get, that we may have a deal with them on. So ICS background. ICS represents organizational best practices and has become the protocol for incident management. It started back in the 70s out in California during the California wildfires. It enables them to be able to manage multiple fires in different parts of the county or state at one time. In order for ICS to work, it's a whole community approach. So every part of society must be involved. That's the federal government is only one part of the whole community. So if the federal government has kind of dictated and laid down, this is NIMS, we kind of have to still kind of fall under that for us to all work together. So the whole community approach ensures solutions that serve the entire community are actually implemented. So when you look at this sphere of all these different groups, you have transportation, you have agriculture, state governments, Kim Nuke, local governments, public works, healthcare, law enforcement. You have private sector organizations. So private sector might be like Dominion Virginia Power. It might be Verizon for communications. We have faith-based groups, which come in handy with like the volunteer organizations, the VOADs. We also have non-government organizations. And then we have higher education. So they all have to kind of interwork together. And if we're all talking the same language, it goes a long way. So when does public health use ICS? I mean, you're working as volunteers. We're in public health. Well, we use it in a lot of different responses. We use it in bioterrorism threats and events, chemical, radiological, nuclear incidents. We have disease outbreaks. So right now we're dealing with not just COVID, but we're also dealing with monkeypox, hurricanes, floods. In fact, I'm staffing over the weekend for the floods in Buchanan, down in Southwest Virginia. They're preparing for more weather. So I'll be staffing the state EOC for that. You know, so there's lots of other examples that are out there. Kate, is there any other examples that are showing up in the chat?
No examples. Somebody did define VOAD though, which is Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster.
See, sometimes I'm even guilty of the acronyms. when they throw in there.
You can't get away from it.
I can't get away from them. They're very easy and they're fun to use and they're easy to use. The problem is they're not always necessarily meaning the same thing for everybody. So, and we'll get into a little more of that later. So,
oh, somebody said snowstorms.
Oh, snowstorms, absolutely. Jonas was a big one we had probably about 5 or 6 years ago. We had a snowstorm Jonas, which definitely crippled the state in a lot of ways. So there was many a night that I spent sleeping at the EOC, so because I was kind of snowed in. So with 5 ICS management functions, we have incident command, which is the person that kind of signs off on everything. We have operations section, we have planning section, logistics section, and then finance and administration section. So there's general staff functions. Under that general staff, we have the operations chief, and that operations chief manages all the incident related tactical activities. So they're the ones that are in charge of anything that's been laid down that we're going to achieve an objective. They're the ones that are going to put it into play. The people that work under the operations chief, under the operations section, I term those, they're like the boots on the ground. They're the ones that are actually going out to achieve the objective. And that's you guys. I mean, that's you going out and doing the volunteer work and putting the time in. We also have the planning chief. And the planning chief gathers and disseminates information critical to the incident. So they'll gather up all the information that's coming back from operations and the different groups. They're going to put together a plan, and then they're going to push that up to the incident commander for them to sign off on, for it to be kind of pushed back down to actually implement. We also have the logistics chief, and the logistics chief manages all services and support activities. I know that we all have somebody in our lives that when we say, hey, you know, I need a roofer. I've got a problem with my roof. I need a roofer. And there's always somebody in our lives that say, I got a guy, right? Well, the best person for that role in the logistics chief role is the I got a guy. That's the person that's going to find the resource that you need. Then we have finance and administration chief. They manage all the on-scene finance and administration support. So if the logistics chief is going to go find the stuff, finance and administration needs to be able to get it under contract, needs to pay for it, and then pay for the people to actually operate it. So they're going to manage that side of it. They also might be managing any type of HR issues or any type of paperwork that goes along with that. So within the ICS organization, we have the incident commander, and that's the command staff. And then we have, under the command staff, they might have 3 people working directly for them, the incident commander. And the first person would be the safety officer. The safety officer is responsible for all safety within the ICS organization. They're not necessarily responsible for safety outside of the organization, but they are responsible for anybody that's operating within that structure to make sure that they're safe. So they would be the person when if this was a fire, and they got to a fire scene, the safety officer would basically be saying, we need to suit up, we need to have oxygen, we need these types of tools to be safe. We also have the liaison officer. And the liaison officer is someone that's going to work between the different organizations that are outside of the structure. So that might be working with other organizations that are on the peripheral of what we're doing. Then we have the information officer, and we term that as the public information officer. So you'll hear that as referred to as a PIO. And the PIO, or the information officer, is the one that's going to share the message from the organization to the general public. They're going to craft that message. They're going to figure out what's the best way to disseminate that message. Is it better to put it in print? Is it better to put it on radio, on TV? Is it better to do a social media burst? They're going to look at the best way to get that message out. Then falling under that, then we have that planning section, operations section, logistics, and finance and administration section that I reviewed. That's what we call the general staff. So we have the command staff, which is the commander, which is the incident commander. We have the command staff, the safety liaison, PIO, and then we have the general staff, which falls under that, which is planning, ops, logistics, and finance and administration. So let's say that the incident gets larger and we have to expand that organization. So not only do we have that incident commander, the command staff, and we also have that general staff, but let's say the general staff needs work. We can't just operate with those section chiefs for planning, ops, logistics, and finance admin. They need help. So under each of them, they can develop units, or under operations, they can develop branches, divisions, or groups. I know that's confusing because it should be units all across the board, but FEMA has decided that operations specifically has different branches that you can go out on, as well as the divisions and groups that fall under that. So when we look at requests for assistance, we know that all incidents start at a local level. So like incidents start at wherever you're living, you're right. So somebody asked if, I think Kate, somebody asked something about a PIO.
Sorry, hang on. Somebody said, can you explain the difference between ops and logistics a little more? Those seem similar.
Great, absolutely. So logistics, I'm sorry, let's start with ops. Operations are the boots in the ground. They're the ones that are going out to do the job that the objectives have been detailed to them for. So they're going out to do the job. Logistics is going to provide them whatever tools and resources they need to do that job. So,
and then, sorry, go ahead.
So let's say that one of the jobs is they're putting out a fire at a wildfire, right? So a wildfire, they use bulldozers for it. So we might, as an operations person, you might be able to drive a bulldozer, but you don't have a bulldozer. So logistics is going to find a bulldozer for you to use. So what were you saying, Kate?
Oh, and then somebody else said, can you explain how the information officer and the liaison officer are different? I am tracking these questions, so if you would rather just have them all asked at the end, James, it's totally up to you.
That's fine. Sometimes I catch that out of the corner of my eye as I'm going down the slide deck. So sometimes it's easier just to do it while I'm there. The PIO and the liaison officer. So the liaison officer is working with agencies outside of the organization. So they're actually working outside of the ICS organization. So let's say that the incident that we're working doesn't necessarily involve Virginia Power, but there could be some things that we're looking in the background to say, hey, in the future, there might be situations where we're going to lose power at this location. What can we do about that? So the liaison officer is working with those. The PIO is the one that's working with the message that's going out to the general public as a whole. So they're making sure that the message gets crafted, and they're making sure that how they communicate it and who they communicate it to. So liaison is working with the agencies. Public information is working with the public. So when we look at the flow of requests for assistance, we have that, I mentioned that the localities, that's where the incidents are going to start. So that's where we have the local EOCs. And so they're going to create a incident command or unified command is going to be on site at whatever the incident is. And then they might open their local EOC. And that's probably within some type of county building, city building. They have an emergency operations center. So local to local, they might, let's say that, and I'm just going to deal with some localities here. Let's say that it's City of Richmond and they need help. They might reach out to County of Henrico or County of Chesterfield for mutual aid, right? So they're just going to go back and forth. But let's say they've gone to that well and that well is dry. So Henrico says, nope, I've used everything that I had. Chesterfield says, oh, I don't have anything left either. Then they might look to the private sector or some other non-government organizations for assistance. If they still can't make any headway and they're not getting the resources that they need, they're going to pass that request up to the State Emergency Operations Center. And that's where I kind of sit in the ESF for public health. So with the ESF 8, or the Emergency Support Function 8 at the EOC, we handle things with public health, Office of Emergency Medical Services, so the rescue squad. So we act as a liaison with the emergency councils, and we also handle the chief medical examiner. So if there's anybody that has expired, so we work with that. So they pass the request up to the state EOC. State EOC then divvies it out to whatever emergency support function would handle that type of resource. We get it and we decide what we can do with it, if we can do anything with it, and then we'll push that resource back down or coordinate it. So we're really our coordination point, because I can tell you that I, at the state EOC, don't have bulldozers, or I don't have masks in my back pocket as a resource, or gowns for hospitals. But there are places that I know to go get those things. So that's where I reach out to our partners to gather them. But at some point, there's a push and pull where maybe we've gotten to the point where we can't fulfill any of the requests because everything that we have has been tapped out. All of our resources have been tapped. So that's when we reach up to the federal agencies and departments, going to FEMA, maybe enacting the federal emergency ambulance contract to get more rescue squads in action. Because the localities just don't have them, and we don't have any at the state level, so we had to go to the federal to enact it. And then we push that assistance down. So again, it all starts at the local, and they're going to try to figure it out, because I will tell you, all the localities, they really will go out of their way to not have to ask for help from the state, or for us to have to ask help from the feds, because they're very hardy people, right? I can give you an example. Out on the eastern shore of Tangier Island, there was a snowstorm, and it was like really bad cold weather for like a week or two at a time. And they were up there, and the ice boat was there, and we kept reaching out to them. Hey, everything okay? We're good. Hey, are you good? We check back a day later. Are you good? We're good. No problems. The problem is with a small island like that, you think, well, okay, they're just going to hunker down and do what they do, which is great, except they were starting to run out of medicines, like medicines that they need on a regular basis, diabetes medicine, heart medicine, things like that. So all of a sudden they reach out to us and say, oh, wait, we need help now. Even though we've been asking them all along, oh, by the way, our ice boat, the one that breaks through the ice to go to shore, it's broken. So we can't use the boat. So we had to medevac. We had to get with the feds and use a helicopter, actually drop down meds or airdrop them to Tangier. There's different ways that we can go about that. We're always checking. We're making sure we're coordinating, but the localities definitely kind of hold back sometimes, where they don't want to have to ask for help because they want to show that they can do it, which is great. So let's do a quick ICS quiz. You now know some examples of how ICS is used to manage incidents. So which of the following situations do you think represents another reasonable use for ICS? So I'm going to click through these, and Kate, if you can gather the answers for me, that'd be great. Mm-hmm. So the coordination of a regional drug take-back event for MRC volunteers.
No, yes, yes, no, yes, yes. Can you say the question again? No.
So the coordination.
About 50-50.
What's that?
It looks about 50-50 right now.
Yeah, so the coordination of a regional drug take-back event for MRC volunteers. Yeah, you could. That's the thing, is that we could definitely utilize ICS, because, when you're on scene, there's going to be traffic that's there, people that are pulling up, and so you have to kind of develop traffic flow. So somebody's got to be in charge, right? No, we're just not all showing up as a volunteer and going, hey, who's doing what? I don't know what I'm doing here. I just got a flyer, right? So there's going to be somebody in charge. There's going to be somebody that might be in charge of the logistics while on site. There might be somebody that's working through the plan. Well, we plan to take the drugs here at this table. Maybe there's some other thing that we're going to give them in return, and then we're going to get them out of the building. So kind of treat it more like a pod or a points of dispensing, kind of triage it that way.
Yep. And Nicholas said, as soon as you say regional, it indicates overhead coordination.
Right, exactly. So it's really overhead coordination is true, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to utilize it there as well. So let's say the calculation of total volunteer hours for the month of May of 2017.
That's pretty much all no's.
Yeah, pretty much. Hold on a second. I lost my video here. What happened?
Yeah, no. Yep.
Yeah, so like that's well, I mean, because we don't really need to do ICS to try to figure out how we're going to calculate hours, right? And at that point, it's too many cooks in the kitchen, right? So we're gonna back off of that. How about the oversight of volunteer safety for a door-to-door tetanus vaccination effort following a tornado in your region? So I'm going to repeat that. The oversight of volunteer safety for a door-to-door tetanus vaccination effort following a tornado in your region.
Yes, all yeses.
Yep, absolutely. Because also you're going to have, if we're talking volunteer safety, we have a safety officer within that command staff to actually help with that too. So you're going to have ICS and you're definitely going to have a safety officer enacted. So great. What about coordination of supplies like badges, t-shirts, etc. for volunteers at a health screening event for the community?
Mostly no's, some yeses.
Okay. I mean, really, that one could go either way. I mean, it really details out as far as what's the scope of the event.
Oh, depends on the size of the event. Somebody did say that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, size and complexity. Remember, ICS it could be a small ICS group. It's like
I cannot. Hold on, James.
All right. So, incident command and common terminology. I mentioned this a little bit ago. Common terminology uses plain English to allow personnel from different agencies to work together. So common terminology covers organizational functions, resource descriptions, incident facilities, like what you call certain buildings or certain places at the incident. So, things, that's why a lot of like law enforcement organizations moved away from 10 code. A lot of them, you used to hear a 10-4, 10-4 it was pretty common among a lot of the different organizations, but what, let's say that 10-8 in one locality could be, I'm out to lunch, right? I'm logged off, I'm out to lunch. But 10-8 in another locality may be that I've spotted a child on the side of the road. So two very different things that you're using depending upon where you're at, and you could literally be a mile apart. So we started seeing a lot of crossover. So law enforcement agencies started moving away from that. FEMA wanted to try to implement that as a whole as part of ICS and NIMS, but then they became their own worst enemy by calling it ICS and NIMS, right? So it's a great idea, and we do want to do that, but ultimately we want to make sure that we're able to talk with everybody the same way. So when you do start throwing acronyms around, it becomes something that it can be a little overwhelming, especially to somebody that's new to the organization. They may not know what, that 3-letter acronym is. So the use of plain language, communication can be in plain English or clear text. We don't use radio codes, agency-specific codes, or jargon in order to, it just popped off again, Adrinia. What's happening. All right, so management by objectives. ICS is managed by objectives as a whole. So I can't really, within my organization, what the objectives that we create dictate what parts of the ICS organization that we open, right? We know we're going to have an incident commander, but the objectives might not call for me to have a safety officer or a liaison officer within the commander general staff. And it might dictate that we not break down and expand that scope of going down into units or branches to be that large. the objective could be something very plain. I mean, it could be that we need to have the fire under control within the next 12 hours. Well, that's a very overarching objective. Well, then you break down those objectives on how we're going to do that. How do we accomplish that? You know, the adage of how do you eat an elephant? You eat an elephant one bite at a time. So you have to go back and look at that objective and kind of spell it out a little bit better on how you're going to accomplish that within that 12 hours. And objectives are really communicated throughout the entire ICS organization through the incident planning process. The way that's done is we create an incident action plan, or an IAP, again with the 3-letter acronym. Thank you, FEMA. So with the incident action plan, every incident must have one. So it specifies what the incident objectives are. It states the activities that are going to be completed as part of that objective or operational period. It also covers that time frame called the operational period to enact it. And it can be oral or it can be written. Now, the reason I say it can be oral or it can be written, when there is a car accident and there's a phone call placed to 911 and they dispatch a fire truck, right? A fire truck is on the way to the scene. So they have basic information on what the call entails. So orally, they may create an incident action plan in the truck on what they're going to do when they get there. The problem is when they get there, the scope of that incident might be greater than what they planned for. And so they're going to redo their incident action plan. So it needs to be flexible. So it might be oral in the beginning. They get there. That car accident actually ended up being 30 cars because it was a pileup. So they might have a written incident action plan on how they're going to work through getting these 30 cars and the injured off the scene. So within the elements of an incident action plan, there are 4 separate elements. Well, the things that we want to accomplish is, what do we want to do? Right? So very basic. What do we want to do? Who's responsible for doing each of those items? How do we communicate with each other? And what is the procedure if someone is injured? Because ultimately it comes back to the safety within the organization. Because we don't want you putting yourself at risk in order to do it. So what do we want to do? Who's responsible for doing it? How do we communicate with each other? And what is the procedure if someone gets hurt? So there is no correlation with the administrative structure of any other agency or jurisdiction. And what that means is that in your day-to-day job, you might have a supervisor, a team leader, a manager, a boss, right? When you go into the ICS organization, you don't report to them. You report to how it's been designed as part of that ICS structure. So you know that ultimately your boss is the ICS commander, the incident commander. Immediately, if you're from an MRC perspective, you may be under the operations side. So the operations section chief is going to be who you report to. But that person, more than likely, is not the person you report to in your day-to-day job. So that's just something I like to kind of break out. The organization's uniqueness helps to avoid confusion over different positions, titles, organizational structures. So, whether you're military, not military, whether you work in law enforcement or you work in healthcare, each of those have different things that they call their command structures. But when an incident hits and we've been pulled into this ICS, that structure is going to be common for everybody. It's going to be the new commonality. Someone who serves as a chief every day may not hold that title when deployed under an ICS structure. So, you may be a chief, you may be a manager. So as a manager, you might be put under the ICS structure. You're not a manager anymore. You're reporting to somebody else. Or in some organizations, I've seen where somebody that is not a manager is put into a management or a chief role, section chief role, and the manager that they normally report to reports to them. So the challenge is being able to take off the hats and changing the hats from what your day-to-day role is to what the ICS role is. And, you know, when we get into an ICS organization, it's also about how many people we're going to have working there, which could be a lot. And we try to maintain what's called span of control. And in an ICS, in an incident command structure, span of control is the number of individuals or resources that one supervisor can manage effectively during an incident. It's also the key to effective and efficient incident management. So what do you think that number is? What do you think a span of control is for an effective supervisor? All right, I'm seeing 4 to 5, 7,
3,
7,
1.
leader 5, 10, 6, 8. And somebody says it varies according to function. So really, span of control is anywhere between 3 to 7. The optimum number that FEMA likes to have per supervisor is 5. You know, when you get outside of that scope of that number of people, it can be kind of unruly and hard to manage. So if you have to go more than that 7, you really need to think about breaking out into separate groups and having a separate supervisor. So speaking of supervisor, we also have the chain of command. So the chain of command is the orderly line that details how authority flows up and down the ICS organization. And it allows an incident commander to direct and control the actions of all personnel in the incident. It also avoids confusion by requiring that orders flow from supervisors. So, you know, the information is going to be passed up to the incident commander. You know, the planning section is going to make the plan. They're going to pass it up. Incident commander is going to sign off on it. They're going to communicate it out to everybody. And then that information comes down and gets trickled down to the operations, who's going to enact it. And then logistics, who's going to find the stuff to help the operations enact it, etc. But it's an up-down flow of information. It's an up-down flow of orders. Now, the thing not to confuse it with is unity of command. So we talked about unified command, and that's the orderly flow of orders up and down the organization. But unity of command is that you will report to only one incident command supervisor. So you're only going to have one supervisor. You're not going to report to a bunch of different bosses. You're going to report to that one supervisor. That's why the span of control should be that 3 to 7, right? So you're going to receive your work assignments only from your ICS supervisor. When you're assigned to an incident, you're no longer report directly to your day-to-day supervisor. So this goes back to what we were talking about. You know, you might put on a different hat, and then the person you normally report to is not the person you're reporting to in this particular incident. So ICS Nuggets, just some brain nuggets here. We have incident commander has overall responsibility. When they're in charge, they sign their name off on every plan that goes out of there, and that's whether it's good or bad. So they take the heat for it. Standard terminology is used to help reduce confusion between ICS and then day-to-day positions, so we're all talking the same language. Span of control varies from 3 to 7 staff, with the optimum number is 5. And incident action plans establish the overall incident objectives, strategies, and tactics. So time to play your best guess. Which incident command position is responsible for all incident activities, including the development of strategies and tactics, and ordering and release of resources? I'm seeing IC
Incident commander.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Incident commander. Remember, I said they're signing off on it. They're responsible for everything. So they're getting guidance and other people are doing it, but they're signing off on it, say that, hey, go forth and prosper. This is what you need to do. Next question. As a volunteer, which section chief would you likely work under during an incident? Would it be A, logistics, B, planning, or C, operations? And I see overwhelming C's showing up on there for operations. Absolutely, because bless you, you are the boots on the ground. You are the people that make it move. So without you, we couldn't function in the other parts of the ICS organization. So let's do a practice scenario. So let's say this is an outbreak response. If we're using ICS in public health and there is a tuberculosis outbreak, and let's just say in the fictional town of Mountain View, Virginia, what functions or activities do you see for MRC volunteers to support an incident like that? So what functions or activities do you see for MRC volunteers to support a tuberculosis outbreak? All right, I see contact tracing, quarantine testing, pod, testing, med dispense, outreach, isolation, all of the above. Absolutely. You could be used in so many different ways in an outbreak. I think that we really tested that and put it to the to the test with COVID. And we're starting to see a little bit that's coming a little more with monkeypox, but we are definitely seeing the sky's the limit on how your tools can be utilized as a resource in an ICS organization. Absolutely. So which general staff position might the district nurse manager serve during the outbreak? They could serve as an incident commander. I see that. I see IC, ops chief. Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the locality, because if the health director has kind of passed that down to the nurse manager, they might be the incident commander in that. So the health director can do other stuff. But most definitely they would always be probably that ops chief. They could also be in planning, and because as a nurse manager, they got a plan to figure out how we're going to tackle this TB outbreak. So yeah, they could serve in a couple of different roles. So during your shift, while working this incident, you notice that a critical supply is running low and about to run out. Who would you report that to? Your supervisor, your supervisor, your supervisor, your supervisor. Absolutely. You're going to report it to your supervisor, because your supervisor is then going to report that information up to either logistics. You know, they're going to have a meeting. They're going to have that incident planning meeting with the logistics and financial, and they're going to have the operations, and they're going to have planning, and then they're going to have that meeting with the IC, who's going to say, okay, well, y'all make that happen. So yeah, you're going to report to your direct supervisor in that situation. Absolutely. That's great. So last question. Is this, when you're looking at this screen, is this NIMS or is it ICS? ICS, absolutely. This is the brick within the house known as NIMS, right? All right, so some things to remember, that someday you may be asked as a non-leader and be placed in a position of leadership. I want you to know that you can do it, okay? I have every faith that you can do it. I have seen people that have been plucked out of obscurity, put into a situation to lead, and they are some of the best leaders I've ever seen. Trust me, you will not be asked to do something that we don't feel that you can do, okay? You may be a leader placed into a position of non-leadership, but the thing to remember there is that, remember, you can't do everything yourself. So sometimes you have to take a step back and let your boots hit the ground and somebody else dictate the orders. I also want you to try to apply ICS during your everyday activities and to learn terminology for use during an emergency. And the best way I can explain this to you is that I use ICS at Thanksgiving. And people look at me crazy going, Thanksgiving? How do you use it at Thanksgiving? Well, you know, everybody has to have a role. Thanksgiving is a production in my household. I've got 4 kids, I've got in-laws, and I've got a wife, right? So when we go out there, somebody's got to communicate, right? So I'm going to have a PIO, somebody that's going to communicate what's going on. We're going to have somebody that's logistics. They're going to be coordinating who's going to bring what side dish, right? We're going to have planning. We're going to have somebody that's got to pay for it. That's hopefully the in-laws, right? They're going to pay for that, right? Hopefully, you know. And then the operations is probably me. I'm going to be doing the work. I'm going to be out there like cutting the turkey. I'm going to be like helping my wife put everything. But we all know that my wife is the incident commander. All right. So everybody has a role. That's what I want you to remember. Know your role, learn your role, and you're going to succeed in your role. Okay. So know that all your individual responsibilities will be for all emergencies. So regardless of the emergency, remember ICS fits in all hazards. It doesn't matter what it is. And lastly, I want you to prepare yourself and your family too. You can only serve others if you're prepared at home first. All right, so make a plan, right? Be prepared. And I'm going to play you this quick video real quick. So just bear with me 1 second as I pull this video up.
All right. I know this
We
isn't.
can't see it, James.
Should.
See it? Hold on a second.
Okay.
Hold on. Bear with me 1 second.
All right. I know this isn't any fun to talk about, but we should. Okay. So who's going to do what?
I'll pack the dead batteries.
Great.
I'll only put what I don't need into a duffel bag.
Perfect. That's totally unhelpful.
No problem.
Meanwhile, I will try to comfort everyone by speaking in a calm voice.
And I'll try to get the generator going without any gas.
Oh, let's not forget the cell phones, which probably won't work.
Right.
And who is going to handle supplies?
I can forget to do a list for us.
Thanks, pal.
Well, I think we couldn't be any less prepared. I'm proud of you guys.
Talk to your kids about who to call, where to meet, what to pack. Visit ready.gov/kids for tips and information.
All right. So I thank you, everybody. That's what I had for you today. You know, I'm sending you out on a little bit of a chuckle because unfortunately that is what happens in a lot of households is that everybody thinks they have a plan. And then they don't actually have a plan. So talk through your plan with your family, be prepared. So we can certainly utilize your help with the MRC. Kate?